Coming up with human farmlands stretching further into wildlife territories, African raptors, eagles and hawks face hunters, electrocution and other apex predators. Why don't these birds just fly away when they see danger coming?
They'll get into fights, they may be killed.
And a Trinidadian musician uses a pre-emancipation of slavery art form to start a conversation about global warming.
I don't think we realize how that we could have an influence.
But first, environmentalists produce a shocking expose about illegal logging in Brazil. The Indigenous director who puts his life on the line to protect rainforest ecosystems.
Essa é a mensagem que nós, através do Somos Guardiões, temos o dever de repassar para a humanidade.
Just 2 Degrees starts right now. We've talked a lot on this show about the unique relationship many indigenous peoples have with the natural environment. The Amazon's aquatic ecosystems, for example, supply water and food to tens of millions of people, including 380 indigenous communities, according to the Nature Conservancy, which is an organization that helps fight climate change. And a new film explores that relationship. It's called We Are Guardians, and it features indigenous men and women who fight to protect the forests from the thousands of people who illegally fell trees and mine rare resources in the Amazon.
Forma no maior crime ambiental do Brasil.
E esse avanço dessas manchas rosas é o desmatamento.
A floresta está mais morrendo do que crescendo.
Tem os exportadores que exportam a madeira roubada.
Vai lá para fora, os estrangeiros. Serviço de mexer com funais, cortar tora, trabalhar com madeira. Se parar isso aí, eu vou passar fome.
Claro, com a política. É um fluxo financeiro que ele está altamente interligado nos mercados internacionais.
Essa, né, foi criada, isso não é grupo, não, né, que luta pela vida, né.
Protegemos a floresta, o mundo há milhares de anos. Vocês nunca tiveram direito a caçar e a pescar, entendeu? A plantar nada.
Se nós não restaurarmos essas áreas mais desmatadas, a Amazônia pode ultrapassar o ponto de não retorno. Isso é um desastre para o clima global e para toda a humanidade.
Fale sobre sua relação pessoal com a Amazon.
Eu sou Edivan Guajajara, sou indígena do povo Guajajara, do estado do Maranhão, e a minha relação com a Amazônia ou com a floresta, porque nós sempre estivemos nos territórios indígenas, fazendo a proteção territorial, fazendo a proteção da nossa biodiversidade. Então, a nossa relação, a minha relação como indígena, é que nós protegemos para todo o mundo, para todo o universo, né? Então, essa é a nossa relação de vida, a nossa relação de convivência, né? Da nossa sobrevivência dentro dos territórios para as futuras gerações.
Edivan, qual foi sua experiência dirigindo o filme?
Então, a minha experiência como um diretor e na produção do filme, uma experiência única, porque além de ser indígena também, né, tá participando, tá na equipe de uma grande produção do filme e documentário Somos Guardiões, é uma experiência que é surreal. Eu não esperava, né, ter tanta visibilidade, ter tanto alcance, né, ter oportunidades de fazer grandes trabalhos. Então, eu também, como indígena, eu estou quebrando barreiras, né, os paradigmas, e dizer que indígena também é capaz de fazer grandes produções de cinema, estar em grandes produções e produtoras de cinema de todo o mundo.
O que você espera que as pessoas tirem do filme?
Então, a mensagem que nós queremos, toda a equipe quer, né, do filme, que as pessoas, ao assistir esse filme, que leve esperança, né? Que leve e leve para suas casas, dizer que todos nós somos guardiões, não só os indígenas que estão no seu território fazendo proteção, mas todos nós devemos ser um guardião, porque todos nós precisamos, né, da sobrevivência, precisamos da água, do ar. Então, nós como seres humanos, né, desse planeta, nós precisamos e nós dependemos da floresta em pé. Então, as pessoas têm que levar isso para suas casas E esse é o maior objetivo do filme, a nossa resiliência dentro desse planeta, nesse planeta, para as futuras gerações. Esse é a mensagem que nós, através do Somos Guardiões, temos o dever de repassar para a humanidade.
Isso é um desastre para o clima global e para toda a humanidade.
As vozes dos povos indígenas precisam ser ouvidas.
Joao, is deforestation by wealthy corporations an unwinnable war, you think?
Hi, Reagan. Thanks for the question. I would say that the movie brings light to this complexity of deforestation in the Amazon that shows how the indigenous people is treated by so many different actors, including the global food companies, the huge companies that are operating in the Amazon, that sometimes they are not really there, but somehow they are financing and they are pressing the forest and the deforestation. If it's a war, we can say that that's a war, and I hope nature and conservation wins this war.
We know the largest driver of deforestation in Brazil is animal agriculture, with Brazilian beef a major earner for the country. So does protecting the Amazon mean completely reassessing how Brazil makes its money?
The agricultural production is the main source of deforestation in Brazil, is the main activity that's pressing the forest. But it doesn't mean that Brazil cannot have like a sustainable way to produce food without pressing the forest. So it's possible to produce sometimes the same amount of meat or the same amount of soy without any deforestation, without any tree on the ground, cuts on the ground. Because now we have like new technologies, we have new ways to make things. What we feel at Mighty Earth, that the problem is much more about the will, because of course sometimes it can be more expensive to have a more sustainable production. But to reach this sustainable production, it's a fine connection between consumers asking for more sustainable products and companies being really responsible to deliver that and having the will to deliver a sustainable production.
A last question to you, Joao. How dangerous is it for Amazon's indigenous people to be fighting this battle?
It's a huge battle for Amazon indigenous people, because like the indigenous territories in Brazil, they are being pressed by so many different actors, and like the meat industry, the soy industry is one of those actors making this battle in the Amazon, and it can be really dangerous, including like we have several cases of murders, several cases of violence, and that's very, very sad to see all that happens in the biggest tropical forest in the world.
During the last 6 decades, about 5 million hectares of forest have been cleared in sub-Saharan Africa for cattle grazing. It's uprooted local birds of prey, disrupting their migration patterns and ecosystems, according to a report by Nature, Ecology and Evolution. The transformation of natural habitats into agricultural lands is causing a population collapse, despite the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, in which many countries committed to protecting 30% of the Earth's natural environment by the year 2030. Why should anyone care about the drop in numbers of birds like tropical raptors, eagles, and vultures?
Well, we should all care because just like lions and hyenas, bears, wherever you're from, the top predators, they all play a really important role in the ecosystem. For our raptors, they are, chief in terms of pest control, like rodents, insects. So all of these things are interlinked. They will have impacts on human populations at some point. So yes, we should definitely be concerned. And also, we should also realize that people can actually do something about these declines. Don't think that this is just beyond you. There's a lot of small things that people can do locally to help raptors survive and thrive.
Some people would ask, why don't these birds just fly away when they see danger coming? What's your response to that?
Well, they certainly see danger. They certainly will fly like to an immediate danger, say like a car coming down the road or, or people coming up to their nest site. Absolutely. But why don't they fly further away? Because, most of the raptors are territorial. You have to think of them just like, people think of, like I mentioned already, lions or hyenas or whatever it is on the ground. There's only so many places they can go. Yes, they can fly away, but they'll end up in another bird's territory. They'll get into fights. They may be killed depending on the species. Some species of raptors are extremely aggressive to basically their neighbors. And so, yeah, it's not possible for a lot of these birds just to fly away from danger because it pretty much lurks all over the place. And even flying in itself these days for a lot of birds is problematic because the landscape is now filled with threats that were there even 10 years ago to a lot of extent across Africa. Particularly, I'm thinking about things like wind farms, wind turbines that are spinning. They kill a lot of, especially a lot of birds of prey, but also a lot of water birds as well. And power lines that also go to the wind turbines, but just smaller distribution lines. A lot of these are now being erected inside our protected areas, which are supposed to be refuges for these, a lot of these threatened birds. And yeah, they don't, they're focusing down when they're hunting. They're not focusing forward, nor do most of our birds of prey they're not able to focus forward when they're flying. So all of these things that are now across the landscape are hazards to our birds of prey.
The Nature Ecology Report says the conversion of wooded habitats to agricultural land is, quote, more damaging to biodiversity than any other human activity. Do you get the sense that African governments, particularly in the west of the continent, are concerned about this?
Well, I would certainly hope so. I think any solutions you provide as conservationists have to be, taken into consideration with, the tremendous, cost to human livelihoods, development, particularly in this region of the world where obviously, there's a lot of development projects, a lot of initiatives that people want to develop the continent a lot more intensively. So obviously we have to be recognize that. I think that, yeah, most governments would be aware. I think especially in West Africa, where, populations of African wildlife have plummeted, not just birds, particularly large mammals and, lots of other species. So I'm quite sure they would be aware of it. But, what the solutions are obviously, a bit trickier for sure.
Where would you say the African continent is currently when it comes to the global pledge to conserve 30% of land by the year 2030?
Well, yeah, I think it's really a difficult sell in a lot of places. I know there's a lot of thoughts that this is, somehow linked to, further colonization of the continent and the continent's resources. But I think a lot of, more forward-thinking countries at least are proposing solutions that, are potentially amenable to both wildlife and people. Things like community-based conservancies. I know there's a lot of those going on here in Kenya, where I live. And so these are things that, yeah, they're not a win-win. I mean, they are a win-win, but they're not one or the other. So we should be looking at, these alternative ways of protecting land. That also involve, communities, their rights, their ability to, continue with their livelihoods. And also some of these conservancies within them in the middle also have more protected area inside, like an inner core that is basically off limits to things like wildlife. And those, I think, could be really suitable for some of the things, when we're talking about 30-30, how do we adapt that to the cultures, the customs, and just include the people in those decisions.
And bird populations in North America are also declining. Close to 30% of the population, around 3 billion breeding adults, have disappeared in just a half-century. In the Northeast, white-throated sparrows have diminished by 15% over the past decade. American crows witnessed a 12% decline, and the already rare American goldfinches have dipped by 12%. Scientists say these are signs of ecological problems, including loss of habitats, pollution, and the climate crisis. Calypso is a rhythmic and melodic musical genre with its creation dating back to the early 19th century. Its origin is deeply rooted in West African customs and was sung by enslaved Africans in the Caribbean. Calypso is special to the region. For as long as it's been around, people have used it as commentary on important issues. Its popularity in Trinidad and Tobago has earned it the island's national folk music. Many of the most iconic Calypso songs were created way before some of us were born.
Somehow I see all this foolery as window dressing, there's still a blessing.
Artists like the Mighty Sparrow, the Lord Kitchener, Calypso Rose and Denise Plummer have left an indelible mark on the genre. They've created and performed songs about the effect of bad politics on a population, the repressive nature of capitalism and societal ills. The music has evolved over the decades. While it still exists in its original form, subsequent generations have created subgenres like soca and rapso. And one artist is using the art form to spread the message about climate change.
I think it's fair to say that climate change is affecting everyone. So whether your part of the world is experiencing more heat or more cold, more drought or more flooding, we are all impacted. And I think that that was the major reason for wanting to tackle this topic in 2024, because it is a topic that will resonate with everyone, wherever in the world you are.
My friend, you go lost if you put the cart before the horse. You go get nowhere if you're not making the right play. Look, you're still slashing and burning. From fossil fuels you're earning. You're overfishing and farming. Massive forest you're harming. Naturally, the planet get hot, but your bad habits wouldn't cut.
Why did you write this song?
For us in the Caribbean, at least in Trinidad and Tobago, it's been the heat more than anything else. I mean, it's been ridiculously hot, right? And even besides the heat, I think as children, we were accustomed to there is a rainy season and there is a dry season. So you prepare your mind that there will be rain from June to December and there will be sun from January to, there has not been that. The day will start off hot, so you will get up to 35 degrees in the morning, and suddenly in the afternoon, out of nowhere, there is, a thunderstorm, right? So I think as Caribbean islands, we have been experiencing, and it may be because we're so small, right? And, we're surrounded by the climate, whereas, most of the European countries are landlocked, so they don't feel the impact as much. But anything that happens out at sea, we get it. Right. So there have been a lot stronger hurricanes. You know what I mean? Wind has been blowing. Sahara dust has been killing us, right, on this side of the border. And the heat has been tremendous, right? I have actually known of persons who have gone to get air conditioned units and they're sold out. I mean, when does that happen, right? Because you just can't get, everybody is feeling the impact of the heat. So I think because of that, we decided this year, let us try to tackle this in song. I mean, as you would know, coming from the Caribbean, we have an oral tradition. So when there is something to talk about, we sing about it. You understand? You get it in the kaiso, you get it in the, in the Peregrine, you get it in the rubber talk. So kaiso being my art form of preference, this was the way in which I felt I could have lended my voice to the discussion. You understand? So that we get from the Caribbean, hey, we are impacted, please help us.
Yeah, the origins of, I think, Calypso, Kaiso, as a genre, I think it's about raising awareness of a problem and working out a solution. One of the origins. What power do you think this music has to tackle the climate crisis?
I think the music as a whole, so music for us as a whole is one of the areas that generates thought, that generates discussion. So I think for me, the major thing was, let us talk about this, because I don't think as Trinidadians or as Caribbean people that we're talking about it as much. I don't think we realize how that we could have an influence in the first place. I mean, the Calypso is asking us for individual responsibility in this climate change crisis. Many of us, I think, are waiting on governments to make the decision, waiting on, the COP convention to say something or to send out issue some edict whereby we will have to follow a particular rule. But the CAISO is really asking persons to take personal responsibility for what is taking place. There are things that we can do as individuals without having to wait on government. So yes, we do need the government to make some kinds of decisions, but really and truly, there are things that we can do on our own accord that could help to alleviate some of what we're going through.
Yeah, your lines, it's we who must change to make the climate change back, are repeated often in the track. Do you get the sense there's a willingness by people in Trinidad and Tobago to reduce dependence on, say, oil and gas, to stop littering, and maybe even change the way things like food is consumed?
I think if you were to ask anyone, I mean, Trinidad or anywhere else, do you want to have a better environment? Do you want to have a better climate? I think that there would be a resounding yes. I think the challenge is that we are not aware of the simple things that we do to contribute. So somebody might throw a bottle, litter out of their car window without actually understanding the connection between what I have done and the flooding that might take place next week, right? Or somebody might consume a lot of, cattle without understanding that, agricultural farming is a major contributor to probably even more so than transport. You understand? You hear about the methane gases, etc., that come out of the cattle industry. The fact that they have to clear out all kinds of lands. I mean, you see it happening in the Amazon, where they're clearing the Amazon forest in order to create pasture to raise cattle. I don't think we understand that if we eat less meat, that would, reduce the need for the amount of cattle ranching and the cattle farming, and therefore reduce the amount of greenhouse gases that are in the atmosphere. I don't think we see the connection.
You make that connection quite well in your song, but we often hear from wealthier nations and from organizations from like the United Nations that small island nations like Trinidad and Tobago contribute so little to global warming that any move they might make to reduce their emissions is only voluntary. It's not necessary. Do you think that type of rhetoric kind of affects island nations' mentalities to do whatever they want and not care about it?
I do think so. I think it's actually irresponsible of large organizations like that to make those kinds of statements, because there are 7 billion of us on the planet, and I'm saying that whatever each individual does is going to have an impact, right? So for you to say to one person, here, what, you don't need to worry about this is really for those bigger nations to deal with, I think is an irresponsible way of looking at it. I think we are all, because this is a global society. I mean, we talk about the global village, right? This is one of the instances where we need the entire village to be part and parcel of what is taking on, because what I feed my children, for example, in Trinidad and Tobago, my children will grow up and go off into some of these larger nations and will take with them the lifestyle and the culture to which they've been accustomed. So if I have been telling them for 20 years, here, what, we don't need to bother about this, then when they get to Europe or South America or the United States or other places, then they continue the bad behavior that would have been inculcated in them for 20 years, right? So I don't think that is necessarily the rhetoric we want to put out there. I don't think it's helpful. Yeah, I think is the best way of putting it.
This winter season in the UK has been marked by gloomy skies and stormy seas. The windstorm season began in September and has been unusually long. In January, Storm Aisha left thousands of people without power and brought public transport to a halt. The UK's weather service says wind speeds of 160 kilometres and heavy rain belted several regions across the country. It's the same claim by climate scientists about why this is happening. They link the extreme weather to increased heat in the atmosphere and the unabated release of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere.
So this has been an extraordinary wind season. The windstorm season begins in September. So September 2023, we started to see storms brew in the Atlantic. So now we're in January, we're up to the 9th named storm. Because of the way our atmosphere is now, because we pump so much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and that has a direct correlation to how much heat is now in the atmosphere, that we are seeing more extreme weather. We're in a different landscape to what we were 30 years ago.
And that is our show. But before I leave you, unstable weather brought brutal winds and incredible amounts of snow in parts of Russia, including the capital Moscow. In one day in January, more rain fell in 24 hours than is usually seen in a quarter of the month.